She said, "Stay for dinner." But it wasn't about the food. I wasn't looking for anything that day. Not meaning, not connection. Just a job that paid enough to stretch the week. It was a quiet Tuesday, the kind that slips by without a headline or a memory. The sky was gray but not dramatic. Just still. My hands were already sore from the morning job, but I had one more call to make. A leaking sink in a quiet neighborhood on the north side. The address felt like it didn't belong to me. Too clean. Too peaceful. The kind of neighborhood where kids don't scream and everyone's porch lights are soft amber instead of white. I pulled up in my old truck, parked a little awkwardly so the back wouldn't block her mailbox. I remember checking my reflection in the rearview mirror, not because I was trying to impress anyone, just to make sure I didn't look like the day had already chewed me up. The house was 2 stories, pale blue, with rose bushes that had been trimmed, so neatly it made my chest tighten. That kind of order doesn't just happen. Someone cares for things here. I rang the bell once, then wiped my hands on my jeans just out of habit. A second later, the door opened like it had been waiting. She stood there, maybe mid-40s, maybe a little younger, with a soft, almost reluctant smile. Her eyes didn't do that flicker some people do when they see someone in work boots. No up and down sizing me up. No hint of discomfort. Just calm. Like she was prepared. "Hey," I said, voice low, neutral. "You called about a leaky sink?" "I did," she replied, stepping aside without further explanation. "It's in the kitchen. Come in." The smell inside was warm. Not perfume. Something real. Bread, maybe. Or vanilla candles that had been out for hours but still lingered in the air. The kind of scent that makes you lower your shoulders, without realizing it. I followed her in, boots heavy on the wood floor. The kitchen was spotless, except for a dish rag folded beside the faucet, like she had tried to handle it herself before calling. That kind of quiet self-sufficiency. I respected it. "You can take your time," she said, already moving toward a kettle that had just started to hum. "No rush here." I crouched down, toolkit open, flashlight in hand. The leak wasn't terrible, just persistent. A slow drip tucked beneath clean pipes. The kind of job that doesn't challenge you but still gives you something to fix, something to feel useful doing. She stayed nearby but didn't hover. I could hear the kettle whistle, then the soft clink of ceramic against ceramic. She poured, tea like it mattered how it landed in the cup. Every movement had care in it. From under the sink, I heard her voice drift down. "Do you always work alone?" I paused for half a second, tightening a seal. "Mostly," I answered. "Easier that way." She didn't reply right away. Just the sound of her stirring sugar into her tea. 1, 2, 3 turns. "Some people prefer the quiet," she finally said. "But sometimes, quiet just means no one's asked." I didn't know how to respond to that. Not in words, at least. So I did what I always do when I don't know what to say. I kept working. Tools make good conversation when silence feels too heavy. Still, her words stuck. Not loud, not dramatic, just placed gently into the air like she knew they'd land later. I finished the job within 20 minutes, but I found myself double-checking the work. Not because I wasn't confident, but because I didn't feel ready to stand up. There was something about the space, her space, that didn't feel like a stranger's kitchen. It felt lived in, but not worn. Feminine, but not fragile. The kind of space where everything had its place, but nothing felt like it would break if you touched it. I finally stood, wiping my hands again, and gave a polite nod. Should be good now. Seal was a little loose, but nothing serious. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need to be wide to be warm. "Thank you," she said. "You hungry?" I blinked, thought I heard her wrong. "I mean," she continued casually, "I made too much, and it's just me here." There was no tension in her offer, no expectation, just one plate, no pressure, and I heard myself say, "Sure, why not?" I don't know why I said yes. Maybe it was the way she asked, without flirtation, without suggestion. Just an offer placed gently between us, like folded linen on a table you didn't realize you were sitting at. She moved through her kitchen quietly, the way some people pray, with small rituals. graceful, purposeful. She pulled out a second plate without asking what I liked, as if the meal wasn't about food at all. Her name was Elise. She told me as she served roasted vegetables and something lemony that looked like it came out of a real cookbook, not a frozen box. I hadn't eaten anything warm that didn't come, wrapped in foil in days. I mumbled a thank you and sat down across from her at the small wooden table by the window. The sunlight had shifted since I arrived. It streamed through half-lowered blinds now, casting soft stripes on her counter, her hands, the table between us. She didn't rush to fill the silence. That's the first thing I noticed. A lot of people talk to fill gaps. She didn't. She poured herself a glass of wine and didn't ask if I wanted any. Just offered water and passed it with a smile like it wasn't a compromise, but a kindness. "You grew up around here?" she asked gently, like we were already mid-conversation. I nodded. Couple blocks over, actually. Moved away for a bit, came back when things got complicated. She didn't ask what that meant. Didn't press. Just nodded like she'd heard enough stories to know most answers were longer than they sounded. I asked her the same. She shrugged, swirling her glass lazily. "I've lived a few different places. Ended up here after some changes. I liked the quiet." The way she said that. I liked the quiet. I knew it meant more than sound. It always does. She asked about my work, not the way people ask to be polite. She wanted to know how I got into it, if I liked it, if I found it fulfilling. No one ever uses that word with me, fulfilling. Not about pipes or screws or water pressure. I told her I didn't mind the work. That sometimes it felt good to fix things, even if they didn't stay fixed for long. She smiled at that. "There's something honest about it," she said, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Knowing what's broken and exactly how to make it right." There was a softness in her voice that wasn't sadness, but close to it. Like something worn smooth by time. Like she'd said those words before, maybe to someone else. Or maybe just to herself. The food was good. Too good for a stranger. But more than that, it felt safe. We weren't strangers anymore. Not entirely. We talked about books. Or rather, I admitted I didn't read much, and she pretended to be scandalized. Then she smiled and told me she'd always believed people who work with their hands have stories in their skin, not just on shelves. That stuck with me. The radio played low in the background. Jazz, I think, or something close to it. I'm not great with genres, but it wasn't loud. It was warm. Like her. She didn't ask about my past relationships. I didn't ask about hers. We kept the conversation suspended somewhere just above the personal. Close enough to feel real. Far enough to still be polite. At one point, she looked up at me, really looked, and said, "You seem like someone who takes care of things, even when no one notices." I didn't know how to answer that. So I said the only thing that came to mind. "I try." She nodded slowly. "That's more than most." And then she reached for the candle at the center of the table, short, flickering, half-used, and lit it with a small silver lighter. Not for romance, not for mood, just because dinner felt incomplete without it. I don't remember finishing my plate, or the exact moment the room felt different. All I know is that her presence filled every quiet space without asking for anything in return. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a burden sitting at someone else's table. The funny thing about being under someone's sink is that they usually forget you're there. They walk around you, talk over you, sometimes even leave the room. But she didn't. Elise stayed close, not hovering, not uncomfortable, just present. She sat on the other side of the kitchen island, tea in one hand, resting her other elbow gently on the counter. She didn't say much, just watched, listened, sipped. The kind of stillness that doesn't demand attention, but gives it freely. I was adjusting the valve under the sink when she spoke again. Not loud, not sudden, just a soft drift of sound. "Do your hands ever get tired?" I chuckled from beneath the pipes. "All the time," she smiled. I could feel it, even if I couldn't see it. "I've always thought people who work with their hands see the world differently," she said. "Like you notice things, The rest of us miss. I tightened the last seal, let her words settle around me. She wasn't asking for a response. She was offering something. Recognition, maybe. By the time I slid out from beneath the sink, she had already placed a glass of water on the counter beside my tool bag. No words, just a gesture. I nodded. Thank you. She tilted her head slightly, eyes soft. You said that like you don't hear it often. I didn't reply. Just picked up my wrench and wiped it clean. There's a certain dignity in being invisible until needed, but it's a quiet kind of dignity. A lonely one. I'd gotten used to fixing things in silence. Houses, apartments, broken shelves, leaking faucets. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't care if I was tired or lonely or lost. They just needed to be handled. But this time, something felt different. Not in the job, in me. Because she saw me. Not just the work I was doing, but the person doing it. I leaned against the counter for a second longer than I needed to. Not to rest, just to stay. The light in her kitchen had shifted. Afternoon had folded into early evening. Shadows stretched longer now, painting soft gold across the tiles. She looked up from her tea. You fixed it? I nodded. Shouldn't give you any more trouble. But if it does, you'll come back? She asked it like a joke, but not. Really? There was something in her voice, something that sat right between curiosity and hope. I could, I said, if you needed. She smiled but didn't answer, and then, just as I reached for my bag, she asked, Can I see your hands? The question caught me off guard. My hands? She nodded, calm. You said they get tired. I just want to see. I hesitated, then turned them over. Calloused palms, small cuts near the thumb, rough skin beneath the nails. Not the kind of hands people usually look at closely. She leaned forward, tracing the air just above them. Not touching, just observing. They're strong, she whispered, but they look like they carry more than tools. No one had ever said that to me before. Not in words, not in tone. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled, awkwardly probably, and she leaned back, letting the moment settle like dust. In sunlight, no flirtation, no games, just two people who didn't expect to be seen that day, but somehow ended up reflected in each other. I reached for the glass of water, drank half of it in one go. It tasted colder than I expected, sharper, real. And in that quiet kitchen, with a stranger turned someone sitting 5 feet away, I realized something. I wasn't just fixing her sink. I was pausing, for the first time in weeks, long enough, to let myself be noticed. I could have left right then. The leak was fixed. The job was done. But I didn't. Something about the way she looked at me, not searching, not suggesting, just present, made me feel like rushing out would have broken something more fragile than a pipe. I lingered, rearranging tools I'd already organized, wiping down a wrench that was already clean. Then, out of nowhere, she said it. You know, most people don't take the time you do. I looked up, surprised. She wasn't looking for a compliment. She was offering one, quietly, without ceremony. I shrugged, half embarrassed. Just doing it right. But she wasn't finished. You're allowed to slow down sometimes, she added. Her voice was quieter now, like she was talking to someone she used to be. There was a pause between us. Not awkward, just open. I didn't know what to do with her words. I didn't know what it meant to be allowed to slow down. I'd been chasing hours, payments, and schedules for so long that I forgot breaks were more than just unpaid time. I leaned against the counter and exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. Do you always say things like that? I asked, smiling without showing teeth. She tilted her head, playful but honest. Only when someone looks like they need to hear them. I took a seat on the small stool tucked by the wall. My knees popped, I winced, and she chuckled. I keep that one for groceries, she said, or people who forget they're human. The stool was too low for comfort, but just high enough to feel like I was finally off my feet. My body felt it first, a slow sinking in, shoulders dropping, legs still. I looked around her kitchen, the little hand towel looped neatly on the oven handle. a potted basil plant leaning toward the window, a small wooden bowl of lemons that looked too bright to be real. Everything was tidy, but not staged. This wasn't a showroom. It was a space lived in. I asked gently, "You always this put together?" She smiled without pride. "No. Just today felt like it deserved a little extra." I didn't ask what she meant. Some things don't need follow-ups. We sat in a silence that stretched, but never broke. She poured herself another splash of wine, leaned against the opposite counter, and asked, "Do you ever take time off?" I laughed, genuinely this time. Time off from what? Life? From fixing other people's things. I paused. That landed harder than I expected. She didn't say it with judgment. It was an observation. One of those truths you don't realize you've been avoiding until someone says it out loud, gently, like setting a warm plate down in front of you. "I guess," I said after a while. "When you don't have much, it feels weird to ask for stillness." She nodded slowly, the stem of her glass resting against her palm. "Stillness isn't something you ask for," she said. "It's something you decide to keep when it shows up." That stayed with me. Not the poetic ring of it, but the truth buried underneath. The idea that not every pause had to be earned through exhaustion. She stepped closer and pulled open a drawer behind me. The soft clang of cutlery brushing each other. The drawer gliding shut again. She placed a second napkin on the table, the same kind she had used earlier. It wasn't just hospitality. It felt like a quiet way of saying, "I see you're still here. That's okay. And maybe, I hope you stay a little longer." I don't remember saying yes out loud, but I stayed. Not out of politeness. Not because I thought she wanted anything more, but because for the first time in weeks, someone had told me I could slow down, and I listened. I've been invited to dinner before, usually by friends, once in a while by someone trying to be kind, sometimes out of obligation. But this wasn't like any of those. When Elise said, "I made too much, and it's just me," she wasn't asking for company. She was offering stillness, a place to land, even just for a night. I didn't answer right away. I hesitated, standing there with my hand still hovering near my tool bag, not sure which part of me she was talking to. The worker who came to fix something, or the man who hadn't been invited to stay in a long time. She saw the pause in my eyes and smiled softly, not to convince me, just to let me know I could say no. "Just one plate," she said. "No pressure." That's what made me stay, the no pressure part. Because most of the time, even kindness comes with expectations. Hers didn't. The table was already half set. 2 plates, 1 fork missing, cloth napkins that looked like they'd been folded and refolded a few times, the creases soft and familiar. She served the food with quiet rhythm. Roasted vegetables that smelled like rosemary and lemon, golden chicken still steaming, and bread that looked like she'd baked it herself, though I didn't ask. Some things are better left as quiet magic. I took the seat across from hers, same one I'd sat in earlier. But now, it felt different. Not like I was visiting, not like I was intruding. Just there, allowed. She poured water into my glass first, then hers. She sat down slowly, like she didn't want to startle the moment. We began eating with the sort of calm you only find in kitchens that know the difference between noise and warmth. For a while, there were no big questions, just small things. "Do you like lemon on your chicken? Have you ever tried roasted parsnips?" I hadn't. She smiled and said, "You might not like them. They're a little bitter." I replied, "I don't mind bitter. It tastes honest." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. Then, as she reached for the bread, she asked quietly, "Do you live alone?" I nodded, chewing. "Basement unit. Quiet place. Doesn't leak." She smiled. "That's a rare thing." I asked her the same. She nodded too. "I've had this place to myself for about 3 years now." No elaboration, no mention of a husband, no sadness in her voice. But also, no pride. Just a fact. Like the sink had been leaking. Like dinner had been made. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, cradling her wine glass. I used to think silence meant something was missing, she said. Now I wonder if it just means there's room. I sat with that for a second, chewed slower, let the weight of it settle between us. Then I told her how I used to work full-time, how I left because I couldn't breathe in windowless basements, fixing the same things for people who never looked me in the eye. She didn't nod out of politeness. She heard me. She asked if I missed it. I shook my head. No, I just miss feeling like what I do matters. That's when she said something I'll never forget. Presence matters more than purpose, she whispered. And you showed up today. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. We ate in silence for a little while after that. Not because we ran out of things to say, but because sometimes the right words are the ones you don't interrupt. The flickering candlelight caught her wrist as she reached for the salt. She looked at me and asked, "Do you always eat this quietly?" I smirked. "Depends who I'm eating with." She laughed softly, not at me, but with something inside her that had just unclenched. It wasn't dinner she'd offered me. Not really. It was space, time, stillness, a kind of invisible kindness that asks for nothing and gives everything. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself take it. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between the last bite of roasted vegetables and the way she wiped her hands gently on that soft napkin, the air between us shifted. It didn't feel like a first dinner anymore. It felt remembered. Not in a literal sense, but like our bodies already knew this. Rhythm, the clink of the fork against the ceramic plate, the slow refilling of my water glass without me asking, the way she didn't rush the meal, or herself, or me. We talked, yes, but only enough. Not the kind of chatter that fills time. The kind that folds into the quiet, like seasoning, just enough to bring out the flavor of the silence. She asked me if I'd always done repair work. I told her no, that I once thought I'd study architecture. She tilted her head gently, intrigued. What, changed? I smiled, not out of joy but out of something older. Something like surrender. My dad got sick. I had to work. Life didn't wait. She nodded slowly. It rarely does. I wanted to ask her about her life too, about what she used to do before this house, before this dinner, before the quiet filled every room like a second skin. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, we let the soft light do the talking. The candle flickered with each breeze that slipped through the barely open kitchen window. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime trembled, not loudly, just enough to be noticed. She reached for a small wooden bowl and pulled out 2 clementines, rolled one toward me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Dessert," she said, in the simplest form. I peeled it slowly, the citrus scent rising between us, sharp and sweet. She peeled hers in one long spiral. I watched her hands, steady, graceful. "How do you stay this calm?" I asked. She smiled, not looking up. "I'm not calm. I'm just practiced." Practiced at what? At carrying things without dropping them. The room quieted with her words. I didn't press. I didn't have to. I knew what she meant. The way some people carry loneliness like porcelain. Fragile but beautiful. Balanced until it isn't. We finished the fruit without rushing. At one point, she leaned back in her chair, arms resting in her lap, and looked at me like she was remembering something, but not quite sure what. "You make the space feel different," she said softly. "How?" "Like it's okay not to fill it with noise." That line stayed with me. Because I had always filled space, with tasks, with small talk, with fixing things that didn't always need fixing. But with her, I felt like I didn't have to. There was a comfort in the simplicity. 2 people, eating together, not defining what it meant, just letting it be. No expectation, no tomorrow talk. Just now. I stood up to help clear the dishes, and she smiled, like I'd passed some invisible test. "You're the first guest who's ever done that," she said. "I don't feel like a guest," I replied without thinking. She paused at the sink, dish in hand, and looked at me. "Good," she whispered, "because I don't feel like I'm hosting." We moved around the kitchen like we'd done it before, not perfectly, not choreographed, just naturally, like muscle memory from a life we hadn't lived yet. And in that soft kitchen light, with the smell of roasted herbs still hanging in the air, I realized something. Some dinners are about food, some are about company. But once in a while, one is about something else entirely, about being seen, heard, allowed to be still, without having to explain why. And that night, that's what dinner became. A shared stillness that didn't need permission, just presence. After the dishes were rinsed and the kitchen wiped clean, I thought maybe that was it, that she'd thank me again, maybe walk me to the door, and I'd leave with something warm in my chest and a scent I wouldn't forget. But instead, she walked toward the patio door and slid it open. A cool breeze floated in, the kind that smells like distant rain and garden leaves. She didn't say anything. She just looked over her shoulder and nodded gently, like inviting me into a part of her life she didn't show often. There was a window bench by the glass, low and cushioned, the kind you could curl up in on long evenings with tea and a quiet book. She sat there first, folding her legs gently beneath her, and motioned for me to join. I hesitated, not because I was unsure of her, but because something about it felt intimate. Not in a physical way, but in that quiet, emotional way that creeps in when no one's trying to impress anyone. I sat, leaving space between us. Not too much, but enough to show respect. We both looked out through the glass. Beyond the patio, the garden was dim, lit only by the sliver of moonlight and one flickering lantern that must have been solar-powered. It danced in the distance like a tiny lighthouse for no one. Inside, her home smelled like linen and something citrusy, maybe the clementine peel still sitting on the counter. A soft song began to play. I hadn't even noticed the speaker on the shelf behind us. The kind of song without words, just a slow piano, meandering through the silence like it belonged there all along. We didn't speak, not for 5 minutes, maybe more. And yet, I felt spoken to. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the things she didn't say. Full of things I wasn't brave enough to ask. At one point, her foot brushed lightly against mine. Not on purpose, I think. Just movement. But neither of us moved it away. She didn't look at me, and I didn't need her to. Because sometimes, the loudest moments don't come with sound. I glanced at her, not for long. Just enough to notice the way her breathing had slowed. Her eyes were soft, distant, like she was watching something far beyond the garden. I wondered what she was remembering. A different dinner. A different bench. A version of herself that used to fill 2 plates without hesitation. I didn't ask. Instead, I leaned back against the window frame, letting my shoulder rest gently into the wood. My body, for the first time in days, felt weightless. "I don't usually do this," I murmured. She smiled, just barely. "I know." "How?" "Because I don't either." We didn't need to explain what this was. It wasn't a date, wasn't a flirtation, wasn't a mistake. It was just presence. Quiet and alive. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves. Inside, the silence wrapped itself around us. Not awkwardly, but like a familiar blanket someone had kept folded too long. Thought of my phone in my back pocket. I didn't reach for it. I thought of the bag of tools by the door. I didn't pack them up. I thought of how easy it would be to ruin this, by saying too much, or asking the wrong thing, or naming whatever was happening here. So I didn't. I just stayed. We sat like that for what felt like hours, but must have been minutes. 2 people who didn't owe each other anything. Didn't expect anything. Didn't need anything. Except maybe this moment. A place where time folded quietly in on itself. Where silence wasn't the absence of connection, but the proof of it. The night had settled deep by then. Outside, the breeze had calmed. Inside, the only light was the candle on the table, still flickering faintly, a soft reminder that the evening hadn't ended yet. She sat beside me on the window bench, still folded into herself, still looking out like the darkness held answers she hadn't yet asked for. Then, quietly, she said, "This house used to be louder." I turned slightly toward her, not enough to break the spell, just enough to show I was listening. "There used to be someone who whistled in the kitchen," she said, her voice like the crackle of old vinyl. "He made coffee too strong, left socks everywhere, took up too much space in the bed, and I didn't realize how much I liked all of that. Until it was gone." She didn't say husband, didn't say divorce or death, or ran away. Just gone. And somehow, that was enough. I nodded, slowly, letting her speak at her own pace, letting her silence fill the gaps between memories. "I used to be a graphic designer," she said next. "Freelanced from home, worked on campaigns, packaging, beauty products mostly." She paused. "There's a bottle of face cream in every store with a font I designed. No one knows. But I do." She smiled. Not with pride, with a kind of soft ache. I didn't say anything yet. I could tell she wasn't finished. "After he left," she continued, "I started fixing things around the house. Light bulbs, cabinet, doors, the garden fence, things I'd never bothered with before. I think I just needed to prove I could hold things together." Her voice trembled, not from sadness, from effort. The kind of effort it takes to remember without unraveling. She looked down at her hands. "They're not as soft as they used to be." Then she laughed, gently, almost embarrassed. "I bought this house thinking it would feel like a new beginning, but some days it just feels like a storage unit for the life I planned and never lived." That landed heavier than anything else. I shifted slightly, unsure if I should respond or just be there. She turned her head toward me then, finally meeting my eyes. Her gaze wasn't desperate or searching. It was calm, open in a way that made me sit up straighter. "Do you ever feel like your life hasn't really started yet?" she asked. I nodded. Too quickly, too truthfully. Every day. She smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was shared. I told her about my dad. How he had a workbench in the garage that no one touched after he passed. How I started, using his tools just to feel like he was still around. How I didn't go to architecture school because the scholarship money had to become hospital bills. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, just listened, the way people do, when they understand what it means to carry quiet grief. After a long pause, she said, "You fix things, even the things you don't talk about." I didn't know what to say to that. So I looked away, back at the garden, where the lantern had finally dimmed out. Then she said the one thing I didn't expect. "Thank you for not asking too much." Turned to her again, eyebrows slightly raised. "Most people rush to understand," she continued. "But you just sat. And that's rarer than you think." I smiled gently. "Sometimes sitting is all we can offer." We fell silent again. But this time, it was a silence filled with recognition. She didn't need saving, and I didn't need fixing. We were just two people who, for one evening, met in the middle of our messes and said, without saying, "I see you." Eventually, even the softest nights have to end. The candle on the table had shrunk down to its last flicker. The air from the patio was no longer cool. It was cold. And the clock, though neither of us looked at it, had ticked past whatever hour made it appropriate to still be here. She stood first, not abruptly, just slowly, like she'd been waiting for the night to let her go. "I should let you go," she said gently. I nodded, but I didn't move yet. Some part of me wanted to stay frozen in that moment, in that kitchen that smelled faintly of citrus and old stories, in that silence that had become more familiar than any conversation I'd had in weeks. She walked over to the counter, picked up a folded card, and held it loosely in her hand. I finally stood, gathered my things, reached for my tool bag with one hand, and with the other slipped my phone out of my pocket, checking it not because I wanted to, but because I had to remind myself that time was still moving. She noticed. No emergencies? I shook my head. Just the usual silence. She smiled. Best kind. As I walked toward the door, she followed, slow and quiet. At the doorway, we both paused, not out of awkwardness, but out of something else, something that felt like a question neither of us wanted to ask. That's when she held out the folded card. "It's just a thank you," she said softly. "Don't read it now." I took it, brushing her fingers by accident. Or maybe not. And in that brief contact, there was more said than in the hour we'd spent watching the garden in silence. Her hand stayed in the air a moment too long after mine pulled away. Then she looked up at me, eyes steady, voice warm but distant. "You're welcome here," she said, "even if there's nothing broken." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said what I knew to be true. "I think this was the quietest dinner I've ever had." Was that a bad thing? I shook my head. It was everything. She nodded, like she understood that what I meant was, I don't get this often, being seen like this, heard, even in silence. I stepped out onto her front porch. The air was colder now, still. Her porch light cast a soft yellow glow across the walkway, not bright enough to guide, but enough to remember. As I turned to leave, she stayed in the doorway, not waving, not calling after me, just watching, like someone who knew that certain nights aren't meant to be chased, only carried. I walked to my car with the card in my hand, didn't open it, didn't rush. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, engine off. Her silhouette was still visible, through the frosted glass by the door. Then, just as I blinked, the hallway light clicked off. Gone, like the night itself had folded shut. I placed the card gently in the passenger seat, not ready to unfold whatever was inside. Not yet. Some words are better saved, like leftovers, from a meal you didn't expect to enjoy as much as you did. The engine hummed beneath me as I pulled away from her house, the soft crunch of tires against gravel breaking the night's quiet one last time. The streets were mostly empty. A few porch lights still burned in other homes, but they felt different than hers, colder, brighter, less warm. I didn't turn the radio on, didn't open the windows, didn't check my phone, just drove, headlights casting long, pale tunnels through the dark suburban roads. And yet inside the car it felt loud, not with noise, but with everything I hadn't said. Everything she hadn't said. Her voice echoed in my mind like a melody you hum hours after hearing it. "You're welcome. Here, even if there's nothing broken." Who says something like that? Who sees someone like that? I found myself glancing at the passenger seat more than once, at the card still folded, still unopened. I didn't want to ruin it. Didn't want to see words that tried to explain what already felt complete. Some things don't need to be read, they just need to be remembered. The scent of her home still lingered faintly on my sleeves. That mix of vanilla, something citrusy, and something older, like warm books and soft fabric. It was the kind of scent that doesn't hit you all at once. It drifts in slowly, like the feeling that you've just lived through a moment that'll follow you. And I had. I didn't know what she expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe dinner really was just dinner. But then again, maybe not. Because something passed between us. Not flirtation, not romance. Just recognition. That quiet ache of two people who carry more silence than they show, who speak more clearly in presence than in paragraphs. I thought of the way she looked at me when I told her about my dad. The way she admitted the house used to be louder. The way she handed me that card like it was a gift, not a gesture. My exit off the main road approached. I slowed, streetlights started to return. City noise crept in faintly. A distant siren, a car door slamming somewhere, a couple arguing across a parking lot. But none of it touched me. I was still back there, by the window bench, in the flicker of candlelight, with her eyes turned toward a garden that held parts of her I'd never fully know. And that was okay. Not every story needs a sequel. Some just need to be felt, once, and held on to. I parked outside my small apartment building, engine idling, a moment longer than necessary. Still didn't touch the card. Instead, I sat there with her words looping quietly in my head. Most people rush to understand. Thank you for not asking too much. It was the kind of gratitude I didn't know I needed. The kind that makes you feel like being yourself might actually be enough for someone. Eventually, I killed the engine, grabbed the card, but I didn't open it until much later. When I finally did, hours later in my kitchen, under buzzing fluorescent light, it was only 5 words, written in neat, slanted handwriting. You listened like he never did. No name, no number. Just that. And somehow, it said everything. I folded the card back up, placed it inside the drawer where I kept screwdrivers and spare batteries, the drawer I opened most. Because some nights, some people, aren't meant to be chased or labeled. They're meant to be remembered. And I remember everything, from the way her porch light flickered slightly when I left, to the sound of her voice when she said, "Stay for dinner." And I did.